So let's move to Europe and start with war in Ukraine because I'd love to know what is your big picture view of where the war in Ukraine is now. Do you think that it's a stalemate? And if it is a stalemate, then how long you think it can stay like this?
I wouldn't use words like stalemate or deadlock because there's a lot of movement. There's a lot of things going on. Um, but neither side has a compelling theory of victory, as it were. Um, I think Russia has been having one offensive after the other. Um, and really, the latest one you can argue started in late 23. And it's not achieved a lot. I mean, it has achieved things, they've advanced a bit, um, but at enormous cost. If you don't believe all the numbers coming out of the Ukrainian Defense Ministry, which have put it all a couple of 100,000 lost this year. If you don't, I mean, even if it's 100,000, it's a heck of a lot for limited gains. So Russia, I think, is faced with the problem that it hasn't got an obvious means yet. I think this is a disappointment to Putin of breaking through. I mean, at some point it can happen. People always, use the phrase "suddenly, then gradually, then suddenly," but it hasn't happened yet, and they've been trying for a very long time. And a lot of the towns they're still trying to get, like Poprovsk, they've been trying to get for a year now. So I think that's frustrating. What they are doing, where their capacity is growing, is mounting attacks on Ukrainian cities, which have, I mean, they're not devastating in the sense of sort of Second World War air raid, and they're nasty and really tiring for the Ukrainians. Talk to Ukrainians, I think that's what they say, is by and large they can find shelter and so on. And buildings get destroyed, but it's just wearing night after night. And whereas last year they may have been sending 400 drones a month, and now they can do it a night. So most don't get through, many are jammed and so on, decoys, but it's not good. So I think Ukraine is sort of, well, that's why I think Ukraine would quite welcome a ceasefire, because I think it's going to capitulate because of this. They could do with a break. Russia doesn't have those. I mean, Russia's got issues with manpower, how long it can keep on going. Its economy is overheated, inflation's growing, interest rates are high, and I think Putin wants to get them down, but the inflationary risks of that are quite high. And Ukraine is doing more and more on Russian soil. And it's not killing people in the numbers that Russia is killing people, but actually some of its strikes are quite significant. And that must be a bother. So my feeling is there's an element of one last push about what Russia is doing at the moment. On the other hand, I just find it difficult to see how Putin gets out of this. I think he's boxed himself in. He's done that by his demands on the annexations of Ukrainian oblasts being recognized by Ukraine and the international community, by demands for demilitarization and so on, which aren't going to happen. I mean, they can't enforce these. And I think he's affected by the fear of losing, which I always try to stress is not the same. Not losing is not the same as winning. And I think not losing is quite important to him, because there's a reckoning if you lose. If the war ends and they haven't achieved any of their political objectives, which is currently the case, then how do you explain it? What have you been doing all this time? What does it mean for the future? So I think Putin, I don't think Putin knows a way out of this at the moment, other than to carry on with the fighting. And I don't think Ukraine has got much choice but to carry on fighting, because it knows what happens when Russia occupies. So it's which is a pretty gloomy conclusion. It's not easy to see an early end of this. Um, but there's a lot we don't know. We don't wholly know what's going on in the Kremlin. Um, you can have a sudden collapse of some units on the front, a surprise attack that gets either Ukrainian or Russian forces caught out and allows for some sort of breakthrough. But I mean, both sides have a problem. Maybe Russia even more than Ukraine but both sides have the problem of even if they sort of punch a little hole in the front lines, they don't really have the capacity to exploit it because they just don't have the mobility. Uh, so, and that's why, I thought the best thing going for the Trump process was maybe it would make sense for Putin to have a ceasefire and then have lots of negotiations afterwards, which would go on forever because they'd never settle anything. But at least you would be sort of futile in negotiations rather than futile in military operations. But and because Trump is the best option he's got, I mean, he's not going to get a more sympathetic American president. I wouldn't think he might. But he wouldn't want to rely on it. And if that's the case, you might want to take your chances when you can. So I thought he might make more of an effort, although it didn't take very much to compare what Trump was offering and what Putin wanted, to see the enormous gap between the two.
So why do you think he didn't take it? Because I agree with your assessment largely, and that in a way he is in a bit of a stuck situation. So you would think that Donald Trump coming in would be a blessing in disguise, and he would jump after that opportunity. And he seemed unwilling to give Donald Trump anything at all in the negotiation.
Yeah, I just think he doesn't know how to offer concessions. He's got no concessions he wants to offer. Because and I think this is possibly an underappreciated aspect of the situation. I mean, Trump's view was that he was offering Putin a lot. Hold the territory you've got. Keep Ukraine out of NATO. Normalize relations with the US, and we'll have great economic deals and so on. I think the difficulty for Putin is if there is a ceasefire on the basis of the territorial status quo, then he's stuck with a chunk of territory which is full of unexploded ordnance. There's little economic activity. Is depopulated. The population that's left, a lot of it, and all of it, is hostile. A large border that will need defend. It's not a great deal unless you've got a different regime in Kiev, which is why he started off the way he did. It's not. He's just making his situation more difficult, and he got frustrated with the Minsk deals because they left him in charge of or having to subsidize the enclaves in Donetsk and Luhansk, with Ukraine paying, not paying over anything. And we're sort of stuck with them and having to defend them. And the Ukrainians were just sort of sitting on their hands saying, you took them, you can look after them. And I don't think he wants to have that situation. So you'd have to start to get pretty imaginative in thinking of arrangements. If you look back in the early conversations and some of the ideas Zelensky was pushing, when it was very different. I mean, the early stages of the war, when you hadn't had the revelations about Bushehr and all sorts of things, there were some quite interesting ideas around, and you can see ideas for lease back and so on, the sort we had with Hong Kong and we discussed with the Falls. I mean, there's all sorts of formulas that you can use, but I don't think they get to the heart of the problem. And the only possible negotiated outcome at the moment, as far as I can see, is a ceasefire followed by prolonged and probably pretty fruitless negotiations over a long-term settlement. And you can imagine bits and pieces to make the ceasefire more acceptable, some sanctions relief, and so on. But I find it very difficult to imagine anything other than that, so long as Putin is there and his reputation is at stake.
If you care about geopolitics, and I assume you do since you're listening to this, you might want to consider signing up to get my newsletter, Station Zero. Once every week or two, you'll get a free geopolitical analysis, a story, trend, or pattern of something that's really important but that most people tend to miss. Like the one where I talk about why there seems to be more and more war and conflict all around the globe. Why it's not just a feeling, but actually a verifiable fact. And why the increase in war can be explained with a niche mathematical theory and the plot of Jurassic Park, and what it means for the future of geopolitics. If you want to sign up, just click the link in the description.